So, as we reflected on a few minutes ago while reciting the prayer of the four immeasurables, wishing happiness for all sentient beings, wishing them to be free of suffering, and so forth, let's connect that with what we're doing here in this session. May what we're doing here, what we learn, the positive thoughts and experiences we have, may these contribute to the happiness, the welfare, the freedom from suffering for all living beings. And in particular, may it be a cause for all of us to reach the state of full awakening, the state of Buddhahood, so that we can help all other living beings reach that state as well. Okay, so this session will be a bit shorter than yesterday's afternoon session. We'll go from 4 to 5. So for the first part of the session, I'd like to just quickly go through the last of the the virtuous mental factors, just for auspiciousness, to get more familiar with those. And then there's a number of questions that were sent in that I'll do my best to answer. Okay, so this morning we did the first 3 of the virtuous mental factors, and number 4 is called non-attachment. So this is not the mere absence of attachment. Like, for example, we probably don't have attachment to garbage, but that's not non-attachment. Non-attachment, the mental factor, is the opposite of attachment, and it's the direct antidote to it. Referring to an object in cyclic existence, non-attachment prevents and counteracts attachment and subdues obsession with attractive objects and people. Okay, so things that we could get attached to, like people or, nice things, money, and so forth, samsaric pleasures. So we could get attracted to those. We probably do have attachment to them, but if we're following the path, we understand that attachment is something afflictive, and also it could be non-virtuous because it can lead us to engage in non-virtuous activities, create negative karma, and create more suffering for ourselves. So seeing the dangers, the faults of attachment, it's also a big hindrance to meditation, because when we try to meditate, try to keep our minds focused on an object, even a simple object like the breath, it's constantly running away. And most of the time, it's running away because of attachment. I know that's how it is for me. I don't know about you, but we may sometimes have distractions related to anger, annoyance, irritation, but most of our distractions are related to attachment, things from the past or the future or the present that we're attached to. And our mind runs away to those. So it really makes it hard for us to cultivate concentration and then calm abiding. And if we can't cultivate concentration and calm abiding, then very difficult to develop wisdom, very difficult to get ourselves out of samsara. So we do a lot of reflection on the faults of attachment and come to see attachment as like an enemy, something harmful to us rather than helpful to us. So then we have this intention to overcome attachment. So I think that non-attachment comes about because of using antidotes, applying antidotes to attachment, such as meditating on impermanence, how things are not permanent, so they cannot give us lasting happiness and pleasure and satisfaction. They'll just let us down, lead to disappointment. And also looking at the faults of the things we normally get attached to and realizing they're not perfect, they're not that great. That helps counteract attachment. So there's various antidotes for attachment. So we meditate on those, reflect on those, and that decreases our attachment, hopefully, if we do them well. And so I think this is how non-attachment comes about, recognizing the faults of attachment and applying antidotes to it. So then it cools it down, calms it down. The next one, number 5, is non-hatred. So this is the opposite of animosity, or other terms for that would be anger, hatred, aversion, all those variations of that state of mind where we feel, usually it's towards people. Most of the time it's towards other people or other living beings. We take a dislike to someone and then we can have various degrees, levels of aversion towards them, even very strong sense of wanting to harm them or even kill them. So can start with just mild dislike, aversion, and go all the way up to a sense of aggressiveness and wanting to harm them. So non-hatred is the opposite of that. And it's said to be love and benevolence, not just the absence of anger and ill will. So just the absence of anger and will could be a state of indifference, a state of apathy, not feeling anything. So it isn't just that, but it's actually the opposite. So it's love, benevolence, kindness. And it says, when referring to someone who harms us, the harm itself or the cause of the harm. So those are said to be the 3 objects that we could get angry at. The person who harms us, the harm itself. And the harm itself could be, bad weather or sickness, pain in our body. We can get angry at that because it's causing us harm, causing us suffering. Or the cause of the harm. Cause of the harm may be a weapon. If someone's using a weapon, like a stick or a gun, that's harming us. Or again, it could be something in nature, like weather or a branch from a tree falling on our head. Okay, so those are the things we could get angry at. So in relation to those, this mental factor has the characteristic of love and directly overcomes anger and hatred. So it's an attitude of kindness and softness and gentleness rather than anger, hatred. It's the basis for the prevention of anger and the increase of love, benevolence, forgiveness, and fortitude. So again, I think to have this mental factor, we need to understand the harmfulness of anger and hatred, really see how they are faulty, their cause of suffering, and have the wish to overcome them, not give in to them, and apply antidotes. So we need to make our minds familiar with the various antidotes for anger, hatred, aversion, and work on those, and that will reduce this negative state of mind and enable us to have the opposite, which is non-hatred. Yeah, so in the list of the mental factors, the virtuous mental factors, it doesn't mention love. Love is not mentioned, which seems strange. But whenever the lamas are asked about that, they say, oh, it's this one. This one is love. So why it's called non-hatred rather than love? Maybe there's a reason for that. But anyway, it is, as it says in the explanation, is the nature of love, kindness. Okay, next, number 6 is non-confusion. So this is the opposite of confusion. Confusion is being in the dark, being bewildered, being confused about the true nature of things, how things exist. So it arises so it can arise from an inborn disposition. So there can be natural, inborn, innate non-confusion that is the result of causes created in past lives. And there can also be non-confusion that comes about in this lifetime by study, reflection, and meditation. So we looked at that earlier under the mental factor of wisdom, how we need to study, to learn the Dharma and reflect on it and meditate on it. And so through doing those activities, we can increase our non-confusion. So it's the remedy for confusion and ignorance, and accompanies the firm wisdom that thoroughly analyzes the specific meanings of an object. It prevents confusion, increases the 4 types of wisdom or understanding, and helps to actualize constructive qualities. So this book says it's not exactly the same as wisdom. It can sound like wisdom, but they're not exactly the same, because non-confusion is just non-confusion, not necessarily wisdom. And it's the basis for not engaging in bad conduct. So I guess if we're non-confused about karma and what is virtuous and what is non-virtuous, then that will help us to not do things that are non-virtuous. And wisdom, on the other hand, wisdom involves analyzing, finely analyzing things. And it has the function of reversing afflictive doubt. So anyway, it points out there are differences between non-confusion and wisdom. So those 3 mental factors, I call them the 3 nons, non-attachment, non-hatred, non-confusion, are sometimes called the 3 roots of virtue. And they're the opposite to the 3 poisons. You know, the 3 poisons are attachment or desire, anger or hatred, and ignorance or confusion. So those are the 3 main afflictive states of mind that are the cause of suffering. So these 3 nons are the opposite of those 3 poisons. So they help us to stop those 3 poisons and also to stop our bad behavior, bad conduct. And they are the roots of all virtuous qualities. So it sounds like they don't just arise naturally, although non-confusion, there could be an innate version of that. And yeah, I mean, some people, even as children, may have natural tendencies towards these mental factors: non-hatred, non-attachment, non-confusion. And that's probably left over from past lives. They cultivated these qualities in past lives, so the imprints are still very strong in them. And even as small children, they show these qualities. So they could exist in an innate form in the sense of coming from past lives, but we can cultivate them in this life, increase them more and more. But I think we do have to make some effort. They won't just arise naturally, spontaneously by themselves. And there's plenty of antidotes, plenty of methods in the teachings for how to overcome those 3 poisonous states of mind and cultivate the 3 opposite to them. Okay, then number 7 is joyous effort. Sometimes it's translated as perseverance or enthusiasm, or even enthusiastic perseverance, diligence. So different translators have different terms they use, but I like joyous effort. I think Venerable does as well. That's the one she uses, because it's explained as being joyful about doing what is virtuous, taking delight in virtue. So if you just say effort or diligence, it may not carry that connotation of being joyful. It's like hard work. So joyous effort. Yeah. So anyway, this one counteracts laziness and joyfully engages in constructive actions. It acts to generate constructive qualities that have not been generated and to bring those that have to completion. So I think that to generate this state of mind, we need to be, contemplate the good qualities of virtue, like have a really good understanding of what is virtue, why it's important to cultivate virtue. And it's also probably helpful to understand things like the precious human rebirth and impermanence and death. So we realize that, we have this kind of window of opportunity right now with this life that we have, and it's not going to last forever. And when it does end, we don't know where we're going to go, what kind of opportunities we'll have. So while we do have this opportunity, really precious and rare opportunity to accumulate virtue, we should really take advantage of that and be happy, joyful, to create as much virtue as possible. So doing those contemplations, I think, will help us to generate this mental state. And there's a lot of information about it as well in Shantideva's chapter 7, isn't it? Chapter 7 of Shantideva's Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. It's all about how to cultivate this state of mind and what will help to cultivate it, what hindrances there are to overcome, and so on. Okay, number 8 is called Pliancy, or another translation is flexibility, but that might bring to mind gymnasts. So this is mainly mental, well, it's a mental factor, so it's talking about the mind. So it enables the mind to apply itself to a constructive object in whatever manner it wishes, and dissipates any mental or physical tightness or rigidity. So this comes up in the teachings on calm abiding or serenity. I mean, strictly speaking, pliancy only arises when you attain calm abiding. So you have to go through all those 9 stages, and when you have attained calm abiding, then pliancy arises. But it's said that it does start to arise, just to, in a small way, as you're progressing towards calm abiding. You don't have to wait until you have fully achieved calm abiding to have a taste of this. And so it's a little hard to understand, probably because we haven't experienced it. But yeah, they say it's quite amazing when you do attain calm abiding, and your body feels light like cotton, and like you could fly, and you could, and your mind also feels very light, and you can do whatever you want with your mind. Virtuous things, of course, because you're beyond wanting to do non-virtuous things. But you can just easily direct your mind to any virtuous activity that you want, and very easily engage in it without tightness or rigidity or whatever. So it's like both on the physical level and on the mental level, this lightness and flexibility and yeah. So that's how it's described. So we need to generate interest in attaining calm abiding and put our effort into that, and then we'll experience this mental factor. 9th is conscientiousness. So this is something we can experience now. It's also sometimes called heedfulness, and it's the opposite of recklessness. So recklessness or carelessness is when we're just not careful about what we do. We're not careful to create virtue and avoid non-virtue. So conscientiousness values the accumulation of virtue and guards the mind against that which gives rise to afflictions. It brings to fulfillment and maintains all that is good, keeps the mind from pollution, and is the root for attaining all grounds and paths. So other sources on the mental factors say that this one is a combination of the 3 nons: non-attachment, non-hatred, and non-confusion, and also joyous effort. So when one has all 4 of those mental factors, then there's conscientiousness as well. And we use this term just in an ordinary sense. For example, talking about a student or an employee who's very conscientious, meaning that, they do what they're supposed to do. And they're responsible about, in the case of the student, doing their homework and studying and just being very reliable. You don't have to keep nagging them. And the same with an employee who takes their job very seriously and, is just very responsible and does what they're supposed to do. So we can think about that use of the term and then apply that to the practice of Dharma and our cultivation of virtue, just keeping the precepts that we're supposed to keep and doing the practices we're supposed to do and refraining from non-virtue and so on. So just that attitude of being very careful, watchful, and conscientious. So the last one, not the last one, second to the last, number 10 is called equanimity. Now the term equanimity has different meanings in different contexts. So here it's a mental factor that does not allow the mind to be greatly affected by agitation and laxity without having to exert great effort to prevent them. So this comes up in the practice of calm abiding or serenity. So at higher levels of development of calm abiding, one reaches the point where, having already put in a lot of effort to develop concentration and overcome the antidotes, which are mainly agitation or restlessness. That's when the mind keeps running away from the object, usually going to objects of attachment. So that's one of the big hindrances to serenity. And then laxity is a kind of dull, heavy state of mind that lacks clarity and vividness and alertness. So those are the two main obstacles that need to be overcome on the way to attaining calm abiding or serenity. So having put in a lot of effort to overcome those obstacles and keep one's mind focused on the object, you get to the point where you don't really have to make that much effort anymore to overcome those obstacles. You're able to just kind of flow, glide in your practice of meditation. So it's that is the meaning of equanimity here. So it occurs when you've kind of overcome, not completely, but to a great extent, you've overcome those obstacles of agitation and laxity, and you don't have to put in a lot of effort to overcome them. So it says it enables the mind to settle and remain on a virtuous object and is important for the development of serenity. So it said that this mental factor is mainly on the 9th stage of calm abiding. So that's almost to the end, right? After the 9th stage is when you actually achieve calm abiding. So until then, we may not experience it. But there are other meanings of equanimity. So it says here, this equanimity differs from the equanimity of the four measurables and the equanimity that is a neutral feeling. So there's actually 3 uses of the term equanimity. So the one we're probably most familiar with is the four measurables. The measurable equanimity, where we say things like, may all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of attachment and aversion, holding some close, keeping others distant. So that's the measurable equanimity, where we wish all beings, including ourselves, of course, to have a state of mind that's not strongly affected by attachment and aversion, liking this group of people and not liking that group of people, but just being able to feel equanimous, even-minded towards everyone, having equal care, equal concern towards everyone. So that's the meaning of equanimity in the context of the 4 measurable thoughts. And then another equanimity is neutral feeling. So we talked earlier about the 3 kinds of feelings, pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. So that 3rd type of feeling, neutral feeling, is sometimes called equanimity, meaning it's neither pleasant nor unpleasant. So that's another meaning of equanimity. And then there's this one, the mental factor of equanimity. So just know that the word equanimity doesn't always have the same meaning. And there's a wonderful explanation in volume 5, I think. What is it called? In Praise of Great Compassion. So there's a wonderful explanation of equanimity in that, the equanimity in the context of the immeasurable thoughts. So there's material both from our Mahayana tradition and also from the Pali tradition. So there's things in there I never heard before from the Pali tradition. It's really nice about equanimity. So then the last one, number 11, is non-harmfulness. Also, it's sometimes called non-cruelty or non-violence. Those are other ways of translating it. And this is compassion. So again, where's compassion in this list? This is it. So it says, lacking any intention to cause harm, it wishes all sentient beings to be free from suffering. It prevents disrespecting or harming others and increases the wish to benefit and bring them happiness. Okay, so we're quite familiar with compassion. At least we've heard a lot of teachings about it, and we know how to meditate on it. And we recite in the For Immeasurable Prayer, we recite the verse related to compassion, wishing all sentient beings to be free of suffering. So if we're cultivating compassion and practicing compassion, then we are cultivating this mental factor, where we see sentient beings and understands they don't want to suffer, and we don't want to make them suffer. We want to help them be free of suffering. So that's this mental factor. Very wonderful, very beautiful. So those are the 11, going through them just very quickly. And there's one last paragraph here. It says, even a moment of a virtuous mental factor, which is a natural virtue. So any of these 11 factors, even a moment of them can have far-reaching results. For example, when the mental factor of conscientiousness arises in the mind, the primary consciousness and the mental factors associated with it all become virtuous. So that's a virtuous state of mind. The physical and verbal actions done with that motivation are also virtuous. And then the karmic seeds of those actions, they themselves are actually neutral, but they carry the potency for agreeable results to arise, pleasant, happy results to arise. And for that reason, they are called subsequently related virtues, although they are not actual virtues. So there's a lot of positive effects, positive results coming from even just one moment of these virtuous mental factors. So hopefully we feel inspired to work on having more of them as much as we can. Let's see, there were some questions that came in. So this question was actually from yesterday. The person thought that feeling was involved only with mental consciousness. You need to understand the word feeling, the way it's used in Buddhism, is not the same as emotion. There's a difference between feeling and emotion. In our ordinary Western culture, we tend to use them interchangeably. But feeling in Buddhism is just this very initial, basic reaction to any object that we encounter. And then later it can develop into stronger emotions like attachment or anger or whatever. And so this person asked, how does an I consciousness feel when it cognizes only shape or color? So what do you think? When seeing different colors, do you have a feeling? Do you have a response? Because I certainly do. And I was thinking, Venerable Jigme, maybe you know this, because I heard that, like in hospitals, especially like psychiatric hospitals or psychiatric wards or hospices where people are dying, they'll paint the walls very light pastel colors because they can have a kind of healing effect, calming effect on people. That's true? Light blue, but light colors, light blue, light pink, and so on. So if you think about it, when you see a light color like pink or light blue or violet or light yellow, as opposed to some other color, like for me, black doesn't have the same kind of effect at all. Just check what kind of effect it has on you, what kind of feeling. I mean, I of course, everyone has different feelings. Some people may love seeing black and not feel happy when they see pink. But anyway, I think we do have some feelings, some response to colors. But then, of course, later that can develop into a lot more conceptualizations and associations and so on. But just that initial perception can have a feeling with it. Okay, another question is, in the context of the 3 types of impermanent phenomena that I mentioned this morning, form, mind, and then abstract composite, what are thoughts? Mind. Thoughts are mind. What kind of mind? Conceptual mind. And sensory or mental? Mental. Okay, so thoughts are part of our mental consciousness, and they are conceptual, not direct perception. So they are, that type of mind. And so thoughts, but each moment of a thought would be like a little package that consists of a main mind and then a number of mental factors together with it. So it could be divided up into those different parts. But all of those different parts are mind. They are the stuff of mind, meaning they are clear, non-physical, and knowing, having this capacity to know, to experience. Another question. The teachings speak of the appearance of inherent existence to ordinary beings. Is this appearance a perception or a conception? Well, the appearance itself is not a conception or conception or perception, but it appears to those minds. So according to Prasangika, the Madhyamika Prasangika school, the one we mainly follow, this appearance of inherent existence appears both to perceptions and to conceptions, to all of our experiences. So I'll read you a quote from volume 7, yet to be published. It's on its way. In the Prasangika system, all phenomena mistakenly appear to be inherently existent to all sense and mental consciousnesses of sentient beings, except, there's one exception, and that is an Arya's meditative equipoise on emptiness. So that means when an Arya, a person who has the direct realization of emptiness, when they are meditating and experiencing emptiness directly, non-conceptually, at that time there's no appearance of inherent existence. That's the only case of a mind of a sentient being that doesn't have the appearance of inherent existence. So every other mind that we have, every other experience that we have, until we're Buddhas, until we're fully enlightened, we always have this appearance of inherent existence. And it's wrong. It's a false appearance, a mistaken appearance. Okay, another question. What is the difference between attention and mindfulness? The definitions look similar. I agree. They do sound quite similar. So mindfulness is when we hold an object in mind without forgetting it. And attention also, it says it focuses and holds the mind on an object without allowing it to move elsewhere. So yeah, they do sound kind of similar. But one difference I can see is that in the case of mindfulness, the object has to be something we're familiar with. So it wouldn't be a brand new object that we've never seen before. So it's something we've already known before. We're familiar with it, whereas attention could arise towards any object, even something brand new. And also, attention is an omnipresent mental factor. So it's there with every single experience, every moment of mind. But mindfulness isn't always present. And also, some say that mindfulness is only there with mental consciousness. Those 5 object ascertaining mental factors. Although Vasubandhu, in his Treasury of Knowledge, say that they are there with every mind, including sense consciousnesses. So Vasubandhu would say, even when we see and hear and smell and taste and touch, we have mindfulness and we have concentration and we have wisdom. But I don't think the other schools, the other masters agree with that. So, and some I have heard it, they say it's only with mental consciousness, only when we have conceptual, maybe, I don't know about direct mental perception, but our conceptual minds can have these 5. Whereas attention can occur with, and it does occur with all of our minds, including sense consciousnesses. So those are differences that I can see. And also the question asks, why isn't introspective awareness listed here? I don't know. I wonder too. But I was looking through this book, and it does give lists of mental factors from other sources, other texts, and so I was just quickly looking through the other lists, and I did find introspective awareness on one of the lists from a sutra. Yeah, the sutra on the application of mindfulness. So that sounds like the Satipatthana Sutra, but it's in the Tibetan tradition, so it may be different than the Pali version of the Satipatthana Sutra. Anyway, in that sutra, there's a list of many, many different mental factors, and one of them is introspective awareness. But it doesn't appear on the lists and other lists in other texts, and I don't know why. So don't ask me. Even if we ask a Geshe, they may not know. We have to go back and ask Vasubandhu and his Sangha, why didn't you include this one? They'll probably have an answer for that, but they'll say, oh, it's included in wisdom. That's the answer we usually get. Okay, another question. Is this category of subsequently related virtues the same as roots of virtue? For example, when we learn that anger destroys roots of virtue, what are these roots of virtue? So one meaning of roots of virtue came earlier, those 3 nons, non-attachment, non-hatred, non-confusion, those are called roots of virtue. But when there's this talk about anger destroying roots of virtue, the main source of that, at least the one I've come across, is in Chandrakirti's text, the Madhyamaka, and it comes in the section on patience, chapter 3. And there's a whole discussion about anger destroying roots of virtue. And so I looked that up, and the commentary says, in that context, the roots of virtue refer to virtues that belong to the collection of merit. And it's mainly talking about a bodhisattva, because, bodhisattva is someone who's trying to reach enlightenment, and they have to accumulate these 2 collections of merit and wisdom. And merit is mainly through practicing the first 5 perfections, generosity and ethics and so on and so forth, with compassion, with bodhicitta. So it's mainly talking about that kind of virtue created by a bodhisattva. Yeah, in that discussion about roots of virtue being destroyed, it's mainly talking about bodhisattvas. So that means a person who has already developed uncontrived bodhicitta, And when they are on the first two of the 5 paths, the path of accumulation, the path of preparation, if they get angry, kind of hard to imagine how someone at that high level would still get angry, but it seems possible. So if they get angry, lose their temper, then they can destroy roots of virtue, meaning they destroy a certain quantity of the merit they have accumulated over a period of time. And how much is destroyed depends on who they get angry at. So if they get angry at a bodhisattva who is at a higher level than they are, that's really bad. That's the worst. I think it's 1,000 eons of virtue get destroyed. So you have to go back and accumulate that all over again. So that would be a drag. But even if they get angry at a bodhisattva at a lower level or at an ordinary being, they still destroy a certain amount of roots of virtue. So that's the main context where it talks about destroying roots of virtue. But even if we're not bodhisattvas, or we're just ordinary beings, we can still destroy roots of virtue if we get angry at, if we get angry at a bodhisattva, that's really bad. But even angry at another ordinary person who's not a bodhisattva. So we could still destroy virtue that was created for many years. Not eons, but years. So it's better to try not to get angry. Work on that anger. There's plenty of antidotes. Okay, another question. Could one have such appreciation, this mental factor appreciation? Could a person have that such that they are unable to see that their view is being conditioned by ignorance? So in other words, non-virtuous imposition of appreciation. So as I said earlier, there are different views about these 5 object ascertaining mental factors. His Holiness said they're always virtuous, based on what a Sangha said. But other books, other teachers do say that there are non-virtuous versions of those. So, yeah, according to some masters, it seems it is possible to have a non-virtuous appreciation or belief or resolution. I was thinking maybe Pizzagate is an example of that. Isn't that what it's called? This belief that there's Hillary Clinton and other Democrats have this porn company under a pizza shop in Washington, D.C. So I guess some people really believe that. So it is like that mental factor of belief or appreciation. They hold on to that view very tightly and don't listen to anybody who tries to tell them otherwise. But yeah, that would be very much under the influence of ignorance. So we try to develop virtuous, positive, correct appreciations. And a related question to that would acquired wisdom be a discerning check on non-virtuous appreciation? Yeah, we are definitely encouraged to investigate things. And I think when we come to the Dharma, we start learning the Dharma, we already have a lot of views, a lot of beliefs about things. And sometimes we run into a conflict. We hear something in the teachings that doesn't accord with what we believe. And so that can cause some resistance and difficulty in our mind. But we're advised to check our assumptions, our views, our beliefs, things we've learned before from our parents and our teachers and our society and scientists and books we've read and so on and so forth. Are these things true or not? And so we should check, investigate, use wisdom. So this is the use of wisdom, that mental factor to investigate. Think about, do research, discuss with friends, with Dharma friends, with Dharma teachers, and so on. So that would be included in wisdom. Oh, so that's the end of the questions. Okay, we got 10 minutes left. If there's any other questions that you'd like to ask.
I have a follow-up question to my question on about what is a thought. What I'm struggling with is it seems like the thought is the object of awareness, and so I'm not sure how that fits with the definition of knowing. The clarity part I understand, it's non-material, but it doesn't seem like a thought is knowing.
Yeah, I think perhaps in our Western culture, Western society, we do think of thoughts in that way as more what we think about. Yeah, we pay more attention to a thought of my mother. And so then the thought can seem like the object rather than. So when we use that term in Buddhism, we're talking about the subject. I mean, there's always an object, of course, there has to be an object, but we're focusing here, like in this context of Lorig, we're focusing more on the subject, that which thinks, that which has that awareness. So that's how I'm using the term thought, and that's how it's used. I mean, that's an English word that, in the Lorig text, the term is conception, or conceptual mind, which makes it much more clear, conceptual mind. So, but what is a conceptual mind? It's a thought. But yeah, I guess another thing too is when we talk about thoughts and thinking, we may think of them more as things we do deliberately and consciously. And in Buddhism, in teachings on mind and mental factors, I mean, even animals have conceptual minds. Babies have conceptual minds. So it's not necessarily adult thinking, or, you know what I mean? What we might normally think of as thoughts. Just any kind of mind in a living being that is mental consciousness rather than a sensory consciousness. It's a mental consciousness, and it's not a direct perception. So it's dealing with its object through an image rather than directly. So that type of mind is what we're talking about here, and it can occur in any kind of person, a human being, an animal, a baby, and maybe even a person, I don't know, a person who's suffering from dementia or has had some kind of brain injury and they're not able to have normal cognitive functions. They probably still have that kind of mind. For example, if they do manage to remember something, some kind of memory from the past is there. So that would be this type of mind. Does that help? It's probably a different way of looking at it than in our normal Western view of things.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. I guess, I was just really dividing subject and object. And what I think I hear you saying is that distinction isn't so relevant in the case of conceptions.
Well, it is relevant. We haven't gotten into the objects yet, but in Lorig, that's another whole area when you start talking about objects. We did that a little bit last time. The different kinds of objects of a mind, like an appearing object and an apprehended object, So there can be a number of different objects. And yeah, that gets very complicated, but we haven't dealt with that yet. So here we're mainly focusing on the subjective side of experience rather than the objects.
Are emotions considered conceptual?
Yeah, the word emotion doesn't exist in Tibetan or Sanskrit or Pali. In the Buddhist explanation of mind and all the different types of mind, there's no word that equals emotion in our Western language. There's actually a discussion about that in this book, and why it is that Westerners use the term emotion. It goes back to the Greeks. and this division between rational thinking and emotions, yeah? That those are like two different areas of experience. And Buddhism never had that kind of distinction. I mean, of course, there's talk about reason and there are emotions, but they're not called emotions. There's no separate category of emotions. So what we would call emotions, for example, anger, would be an afflictive mental state. So we find the emotions within the various categories of mental factors. So they would be mental factors, some afflictive. And among the virtuous mental factors, I'm not sure if we would call those emotions or not. Because love, I mean, love, people can get very emotional when they're in love, but that kind of being in love isn't quite the same as love in Buddhism, because we're trying to cultivate this feeling of love or kindness or benevolence towards everybody, not just our one, important object. What are other examples of emotions that joy would be an emotion? Fear, that's also one that's missing in those two mental factors. Usually we don't find any mention of fear. So anyway, things like anger and attachment, especially the afflictive ones, those are conceptual minds. Those are, they are mental factors, but they're always part of conceptual minds, and specifically wrong conceptions. They are wrong conceptions because they're not seeing things correctly. When we're angry at somebody, we see that person as 100% bad and horrible, and there's nothing good about them at all, and they don't deserve to be treated with kindness. And so we have, mistaken ideas, conceptions about that person. Yeah, that's how they're considered in Buddhism, wrong conceptions, wrong conceptual minds. But then it depends on what we mean by emotion, because if emotion also includes the positive states of mind, like love and compassion, then those would not be wrong conceptions. Those, I think they would still be conceptual, because they do involve, for example, compassion, seeing sentient beings and understanding that they are suffering and they don't want to suffer and we don't want them to suffer. So that is conceptual rather than direct perception.
But the Buddha has love and compassion and no conceptions.
Yeah, well, that came up yesterday. It's hard to know how the Buddha's mind works. I mean, definitely he has love and compassion, but without conception. But I'm talking more about us, ordinary beings. We're still trying to develop these states of mind towards living beings. But yeah, eventually at the later stages of the path, they're just there, and no need to make effort and no need to think about why they deserve compassion. It's just there.
Follow up to the previous one. How is emotional state different from thinking?
Well, like I say, in Buddhism, they don't really talk about emotion. They don't have that terminology of emotion. So they would say, for example, when we're angry, there's a process that gives rise to anger. It starts with ignorance, seeing myself, the other person, everything, everyone as inherently existing. So we see everything in a mistaken way. And so our mind is heavily under the influence of ignorance. And then there's a person there that we probably have an unpleasant feeling about when we first see them. There's an unpleasant feeling. And we don't catch that and say, oh, I better be careful here. It just flows. And another mental factor called inappropriate attention, which is probably that mental factor of attention, but in a mistaken way. So that adds on additional faults to the person who we don't like, exaggerates, making the person into somebody really bad, really horrible. And then the result of all of that mental activity, which can happen really fast, just like that, and not deliberate or conscious, it's just an automatic thing, probably because of a lot of habituation. And then, poof, anger or hatred comes up. And then, if we're not careful, we can feed that anger, so it grows more and more and more. And pretty soon, we just hate that person. We just have anger at that person. So there's a lot of thought involved in that. And then Buddhism doesn't talk so much about the physical side of it, but definitely we feel things in our body. We'll probably feel tightness here. And I think, what do they say when you're angry? That blood rushes to your arms and your hands, or I don't know, Holiness talks about that. I learned it from the scientists. So there's physiological things happening in your body. Yeah. So there's things happening in the body as well. But according to Buddhism, those bodily reactions occur because of what's going on in our mind rather than the other way around. It's not that first your body is angry and then your mind gets angry, which I think some people believe, but in Buddhism it's the other way around. So there's thinking, and that thinking causes these physical reactions, and probably more thinking as well. What am I going to do to this person to get back at them for what they did to me, and da 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 da. So this will come next time, because in the next course in November, we'll look at the afflictive mental states like anger and so on. Okay, so thank you for joining us, and we'll end by making a dedication of our positive energy, merit, virtue. We created virtue today by coming together today and yesterday with this positive intention to learn something about our mind for the benefit of ourselves and others. So let's rejoice in the virtue we've created and share it with all other beings, which is a way of increasing the virtue even more. So everyone can benefit from it.